I'm so excited to present this topic to you. We're going to talk about farming today. And farming is actually looking for a problem worth solving. So we're going to talk about business development, voice of the customer, technology roadmaps, which lead to gap analyses, and I'll explain all that, requests for information, and risk registers. So basically, we're going to the program and we're going to the customer to look for an idea that we can innovate on. Isn't that fun? All right, here's the patent life cycle. We've looked at this before. We're coming back to the 0th step. It's called the 0th step because you might already have an idea. And if you do, great. Go on to number 1. However, you're going to want to think about which problem you're actually solving. That's important. So if you don't have an idea, you want to start with this 0th step. And there are actually several chapters in the book dedicated to this because it is so important. If you create something and nobody wants it, then you've really just wasted your time. So let's find something worth doing. Again, we've talked about this flowchart before. I'm not going to go through it, but if you don't have a good idea, chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are where you're going to want to go, and we're starting with chapter 2 today. Business development is more than just sales. Business development is actually forming a relationship with the customer and finding out what's important to them. It may surprise you what they say. Ask them their pain points, what could be improved in your product, and you might put that a little bit differently and say, hey, what really sucks? Because that will let you know what needs to improve. And you can ask what features you want. By that I mean, if you have a cell phone and the customer tells you that the camera's not really that good, well then you know that you can innovate on the camera. If they say they want a new feature, for example, they want a new app, or they want a bottle opener on the side of the cell phone, then you know that that's something that you can invent. So having these customer conversations can be very enlightening. Inside a big company, you might not be able to talk to the customer directly. So you may approach the business development manager and ask him or her for this information. If they don't know it, they can go to the customer and have these conversations and report back to you. So I have an astronaut on the slide because my major customer for the past few years has been NASA, and the astronaut's the customer. And that's kind of cool. Be able to talk to astronauts and ask them what they want. Here's the caveat. Henry Ford famously said, if I had asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. There would have never been a car. So if you're looking for disruptive innovation, talking to the customer may not be the best way to get there. You may look for a different way to approach the problem, which is why we have multiple sections in this chapter. Strawberry Exploration, or Berry X for short, is a fictional company. It's not real and is not intended to imitate any existing company. It's for instructional purposes only. This is Berry X's technology roadmap. These are the milestones that the strategists within the program have set for the team. The main goal is the Mars landing. But before we land on Mars, we need to prove the capabilities by landing on the moon. And before we land on the moon, we're going to go even closer to Earth. We're going to go to the space station and prove that we can dock there. In order to get there, we have to have a rocket, and the rocket has to have an engine. So you can see how the tech roadmap is built based on the company's goals. From these tech roadmaps, we pull out a gap analysis. That is, what are the things we need in order to complete these milestones? And that can be as simple as hiring a propulsion engineer, or it can be as complex as designing a new engine. Barry X's gap analysis included fuel, landing method, engine design, and a lightweight fuselage. Again, this is a fictional example. However, you can see that looking at this gap analysis, you can say, oh, well, hey, I've got some ideas on designing a lightweight fuselage. Let's sit down and brainstorm around that and see if we can't grow a strawberry or come up with a good idea based on that gap. And by starting here, again, you have something that's very valuable to the team and to the company. A real life example of this is when a team of engineers and I got together and looked at NASA's gap analysis list. What do I mean by that? I mean, our customer actually puts their hard problems to solve on the internet. Isn't that cool? This is the 2020 version of their gap analysis, and one of their main goals was to get to Mars one day, and a shorter term goal was to land on the moon, similar to Barry X's tech roadmap. This particular gap is incapacitated crew member. A large crew member or astronaut has had a health event and cannot walk to get back to safety, so the other crew member has to help that crew member get there. The innovation that the team came up with was to integrate a stretcher into the astronaut's backpack so that it can be deployed when needed, it's there, and it's relatively lightweight. So I did discuss this in a previous speech, so I won't go into any more detail than that. I just simply wanted to circle back to it to reinforce that this is a real way to find a seed for an innovation. Requests for information are another way that the customer makes their desires known. That is, they will publish an RFI when they're thinking about soliciting for a new project. So the RFI comes before the RFP, the RFI being the request for information, then there's a request for proposal. And so on the RFI, they'll ask, hey, what's possible? And we want a new spacesuit. What should we ask for in the new spacesuit? What kind of technology is around that wasn't around when we bought the last spacesuit? A company might decide, for example, to put a heads-up display in the spacesuit. And by adding a monitor within the field of vision of the astronaut, that provides additional functionality and takes advantage of current technology. Caveat, some companies won't want to tip their hand and show all their cards at the RFI stage. They'll want to save that technology for the proposal for a later stage. However, just reading through the RFI, reading through some of the company responses, industry responses, will give you ideas about where you can innovate and how to help the customer. The reason that we want to hold those cards close to our vest are market discriminators. If I hold a patent for a heads-up display, for example, then no one else can create a heads-up display that way. However, another company might find a way to make a heads-up display in another way that doesn't infringe upon my patent. So I don't want to talk about my patent too early. I want to save it and make sure it is a market discriminator in the proposal if our competitor hasn't talked about that yet. Pretty clever, huh? Risk registers are unique to every program, not company, every program. This is where the team writes all of their concerns. If we don't get this, then this impact will occur. For example, if the materials aren't delivered on time, then we can't build the assemblies and therefore we can't deliver on time. So that's a schedule risk. Other risks may be technology risks. Circling back to the Barry X example, If we don't have enough fuel, then we won't be able to get to Mars. If we as innovators read the risk register and see that, then we can see an opportunity to create a new fuel or to come up with some other way to make the fuel last longer, like the lighter fuselage, and that's a place that we can innovate. That's what we're looking for here. I added Murphy's Law just to make you smile a little bit, because anything that can go wrong will. Nothing's as easy as it looks. We're all probably familiar with this on some level. I think it's interesting because we try to make our risk registers as complete as possible. Sometimes we miss something. So if we as innovators find something that the program missed, again, that's an area that we may be able to innovate. I actually did find a real-world example from my own background. I was on a program. We were making these spherical assemblies that had cameras in them and moved around and looked at different things. Within those spheres were these wiring harnesses, and the wiring harnesses had to fit so that they didn't actually, the wires didn't come down and infringe upon some of the other electronics and parts in the assembly, because of course then that could cause other problems. Ergo, the design had a potting block on there, or a big plastic, it was a solid plastic piece, think of a block of rubber, and that potting compound meant that the item was not repairable. Meaning if something happened to the wire, you couldn't just pull the wire out and put a new wire in there. You had to scrap the whole assembly. This was a problem, and it was causing, it was a schedule risk, because we were only making 23 of these assemblies, and we couldn't get 23 wiring harnesses off the assembly line from our subcontractor. So I ended up making it a whole project to go in and talk to the customer and brainstorm to find a new design. This didn't become a patentable system. However, I wanted to highlight the fact that looking at the risk register identified a place for innovation. And this is discussed more in Chapter 3, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Again, just highlighting the link to the risk register. So what did we cover today? We covered farming. We looked at the program to find different problems we're solving. We talked to the customer and looked at the customer documentation to pull out problems we're solving, so that at the end of the day, after we develop our strawberry, grow our strawberry, get our good idea, it will have a home and be very useful, either to the program or to the customer, and definitely to the company. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope you learned something. It was a lot of fun to talk about one of my favorite subjects.